Welcome to this episode of the Structural Engineering Channel, a podcast focused on helping structural engineering professionals stay up to date on technical trends in the field and to help them succeed in their careers and lives. In this episode, Rachel and I will be talking with Ruth Javati, a disability inclusion consultant at Tetra Tech, Australia, about the topic of disability and the vital role that engineers play in making buildings more accessible for people with disabilities. We'll also discuss some of the common barriers that prevent people with disabilities from progressing in life, the impact of inaccessibility on their mental well-being, and touch on some of the legal aspects addressing disability needs and considerations for engineers to ensure accessible structures. I'm your co-host, Matt Picardle.
And I'm your co-host, Rachel Holland. Now let's jump into the conversation of the week.
This episode of the Structural Engineering Channel is brought to you by PPI, a leader in engineering exam prep for the PE structural exam. PPI provides expert prep courses and study resources designed to help you pass the PE structural exam the first time. PPI's PE structural course is fully updated and taught with October 2021 code references and includes new editions of their PE structural books. PPI's live online courses include hours of lectures, problem-solving demonstrations, exam strategy sessions, office hours, and a passing guarantee. When you take a live online course, PPI guarantees you will pass, or you can take the on-demand course for free. PPI has helped engineers achieve their licensing goals since 1975. Check out PPI today at PPI2pass.com to see all of the resources available for PE structural exam prep. Again, that's PPI2pass.com.
Hey, Ruth, welcome to the podcast. And to start off, could you share a little bit about your personal journey and how you became passionate about advocating for disability inclusion?
Thank you, Rachel and Matt, for having me. It's an honor, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. How I became passionate about advocating for disability inclusion was because of my own lived experience. I acquired my disability paraplegic while I was a freshman at one of our local universities back home. I'm currently studying here in Australia, and home is Papua New Guinea. It's the largest Pacific Island country in amongst the Pacific Island nations, and our closest neighbor is Australia. We're north of Australia. And as I said, I was just starting uni when I came down with malaria meningitis of the spine, and it affected my lower limbs. And I've been using a wheelchair since 2008. I withdrew from studies, and then I came back in 2010 to continue. And I emailed the university before coming back. I asked them if I could come back on a wheelchair, and they said yes, but they gave me a condition. They said that I have to change courses from health to IT because the health buildings had a lot of stairs, and the IT buildings were on the ground floor. So instead of removing the barrier, which was the stairs, they wanted me to adjust to the barrier and change my course to IT. And I had no interest in IT, and I didn't want, I didn't see myself working with computers. So I said no, and I went back home, and that was the drive that made me passionate about advocating for disability inclusion. Yeah.
Wow, I'm really glad that has inspired you to do more, because that's kind of that's a crazy story to me.
Yeah,
what are some of the common barriers? I mean, obviously you mentioned your own personal one that led to this path for you, but what are some of the common barriers preventing people with disabilities from progressing and enjoying life like everyone else?
There are a lot of barriers, but I'll just name the 4 common barriers, and they are attitudinal barrier, communication barrier, physical environmental barrier, and policy barrier. Attitudinal barrier is people's own perception of people with disability, like just seeing people with disability and feeling sorry for them, or just having this thought that you can't do much and we're supposed to donate and help you, like charity and all that. That's an attitudinal barrier. It discriminates, stereotypes, and pushes people with disability further, like marginalizes them. And a communication barrier is anything to do with reading, writing, or hearing. Like if there's a video and there's no caption, that's a communication barrier for a person with hearing impairment. And physical or environmental barrier is similar to my case, where it's anything to do with obstacle that prevents a person with disability from moving from one place to another. My example would be the stairs that prevented me from continuing in the course that I wanted to. And policy barrier is when government and organizations that companies that make policies that are not inclusive of people with disability. Like I come from a country where we still do not have inclusion in the education system. So a lot of people with disability are left out. So these are the 4 common barriers that usually keeps people with disability from progressing in life. Yeah.
Wow. And yeah, I know you mentioned that your case where it actually affected your education with your disability. How do all these barriers, what do you see often in terms of you have these barriers, and what do other people with disabilities, how does that affect their lives, that you see mostly?
For a person with disability, they may face all 4 barriers in a day, or maybe 1 or 2. Like for my case, I faced environmental barrier and policy barrier. Environmental barrier was the stairs. Instead of removing that barrier, they wanted me to adjust and do a IT course. And for policy barrier, the university did not have any like policy to support people with disability, students with disability, to continue the course they want. They wanted me to adjust and do the IT course. So those are the 2 barriers I faced, and I was given just one option, which was I declined, and that was the end of my education in Papua New Guinea. But these are barriers that that usually when they come together, they isolate a person with disability and they marginalize them even further. So if a person faces they can face either 1 or 2 or even 4 of them, and like it just prevents them from living a normal life like people without disability. Yeah.
So Matt and I being in like, the structural engineering field, obviously like the environmental factor that you talk about is one of the ones that really like hits home, right? So just like we have to make sure that our built environment accommodates all different people, right? It's so important. What about in your experience, what steps, so like I'm thinking about for like Matt and I, or just anybody, but what steps can individuals, organizations, even policymakers take to address these barriers effectively?
In general, like if you do not know something, you ask the right people, or you ask an expert that is an expert in that area. So from my experience, I would say that forming a partnership with disabled persons organization, and hearing from their stories and how to best improve the environment or make it in a way that it's accessible for all. Usually a disabled persons organization will have all people with a different sort of disability in that organization. So hearing from them, partnering with them, and consulting them will make it like give ideas to you how to build in a way that is inclusive. And also by doing like consulting people with disability, it satisfies the statement nothing about us without us, which is currently the best practice in inclusion. So anything to do with people with disability, you have to talk to them, because at the end of the day, once you finish the structure and you've gone, they'll be the one using it. Whether they're going to use it, whether it's going to be accessible for them or not, they have to be included at the beginning, so that at the end of the day, it'll be easy for them to use. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in your own, like everybody approaches things from their own lived experience, right? So if you don't have that lived experience, you need to reach out to people that do.
Oh yeah.
Make sure it'll work.
Yes.
Yeah, and inaccessibility, I imagine that would have a mental toll on your mental health, and not just physical, but I imagine if you have that inaccessibility, what does that do to your mental health, or some of the mental struggles that people by not having being accessible? How does that affect the mental health of people with disabilities?
Inaccessibility definitely has a huge impact on people with disabilities, mental health, and emotional well-being, because it causes loneliness, isolation, severe depression, and just lack of livelihood. Like you can't go anywhere. You are stuck in your house, and there is like so many barriers out there, which inaccessibility is a contribution to them. And like that's what I went through when I first acquired the disability I have. I couldn't get out of the gate of my house because or onto the road, because I come from a country where disability is not fully recognized yet. So it was a struggle. It's like I couldn't get out of my gate because the road was not made for wheelchair. Come from a country where disability inclusion is not fully recognized yet. So every day it's a struggle for people with disability in my country. And it really had a toll on my just my mental health, emotions, and all that. But when I came to Australia in 2019 to do my studies, like I thought that I came to a place where like it was a heaven built for people with disability, especially a wheelchair user, because I could go onto the train, access the bus, the tram, and like I could go anywhere, everywhere. I was free. I could feel that I was free. I could do anything, and I really enjoyed it here. And like the best thing about it was it made me forget that I had a disability. But back home, I just stayed at home. I woke up, I saw myself that I couldn't get out, and I knew that, okay, I can't get out because I have a disability. But when I came here, I felt that like I could do anything. I was free. I went everywhere, and it just made me forget that I had a disability. So structural engineers are at a unique position where they either help to build and support our mental health and emotional well-being, or they keep us trapped in our houses, and like it goes down, we go down this downward spiral where we are depressed, isolated, and kept away from the world here around us.
I can see that, like being in your home country, how that would be so isolating. I'm glad you were able to move so that you don't have that mental state happening quite so much.
Yeah.
I was also you talked about the feelings of isolation when the environment just isn't working for you. And what about in terms of, you mentioned like a couple of things that structural engineers can do. So like Matt and I, probably always thinking like just building, safety, building, but like you take it a little further, that like we actually have the ability to really impact somebody's mental state too. So is there anything you can think of that like we especially could do to raise awareness and like work towards fostering a more inclusive environment?
The best way to work towards fostering more inclusive environment would be to include people with disability at every stage, from consultation to design to construction. By doing so, they help to design a structure that is accessible for all, and no one is isolated or vulnerable. Or another way could be to hire people with disabilities organization. They could come into the organization, to your organization, and run like quarterly human rights training, accessibility training, disability inclusion training, so that it just raises your awareness as well as keeps you reminded when building any structures. So that'll be two ways of raising awareness of structural engineers of how to build inclusively, is to get people with disability into the organization, to run trainings, and so that engineers could be aware of how to build inclusively. Yeah.
And jumping into the architecture, engineering aspects of things, I believe you have 3 essential factors that architects and engineers should consider when designing a building or structure to ensure that it's accessible. Could you go through those things?
The 3 essential factors would be consult with your state law or the government legislation, building code on accessibility requirements. If the law or the building code is truly inclusive, it will require you to build features for the 4 types of disability: people with hearing impairment, vision impairment, intellectual disability, and those with facing mobility challenges. And that's the first thing you should do, consulting your own state law or the government legislation. The second one would be to ask a person with disability. The best way to do that is to have a consultation with a consultation meeting with DPOs, Disabled Persons Organization, because they will have people with different types of disability in the organization, and having to talk with them sharing their experience of whichever inaccessibility they faced, it'd be like give you ideas of how to make it more inclusive. And the third would be to have a few people with disability on your board, or with different disabilities on your board, or even employing a person with disability, so that like every day it's a reminder. You see that person and you think, like when designing a building, you think, how does my friend get into that building? So just by seeing that person or having that those board meetings, you are reminded to build inclusivity. I have an example where I went to this state to this place here in Queensland. It's called Maluluba. It was very accessible and more accessible than Brisbane City. So I asked the lady, what happened? Like in Brisbane City, there are some places where I can't go, and she said that on our board, city council board, there's a person on wheelchair. So every time, like if he doesn't talk, every time we're designing a building, just his presence in the room makes us to think we have to build for this person too. So just having someone on the board will just remind you to build inclusively. Yeah.
Before we go on here, I would like to take a minute to recognize our other sponsor for this episode, Menard USA. Menard USA is a specialty ground improvement contractor that works nationally, providing design-build ground improvement solutions at sites with problematic soils. Menard works closely with civil, structural, and geotechnical engineers to minimize foundation costs for wide ranges of soil conditions, structure types, and loading conditions. To learn more about Menard USA or for help on your next project, please visit www.menardusa.com.
Yeah, I think that having them around, I think that's important, having a diverse team, a diverse board. It reminds you of, yes, we're designing the built environment, but we're designing the built environment for all types of people. And hopefully that transfers to what you were saying with point number one, getting it into the government. So it becomes, mandatory and more widespread.
Yeah, I remember a professor in college, I think, said something along the lines of like the built environment is for all people. And so like when you look around and all people are different, like by including them all on your board, your design team or whatever, like as much diversity as you can get on that team, you're going to have your end product is going to serve more people, because just as an individual, you can't think of anything because maybe you haven't lived it,
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit familiar with like the ADA requirements and things like that in code, but are there any specific laws or regulations in place that address the needs of people with disabilities? And can you provide some insight on those laws and what their impact is?
Each country has its own like building regulation, like Australia has its own, America has its own, but the best guide for both countries to use can be the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. It's a legal article, and especially legal document, especially Article 19 of the UNCRPD talks about people with disability living independently. So in order for a person with disability to live independently, they have to have access to the environment without any obstruction. Like they can go to a shop or to the park by themselves, or they can access the transport system by themselves. So the UNCRPD is a guide where it tells you how to build, or it's a guide for all Actually, sorry, I'll rephrase that. It's a legal document that provides a guideline on how to be inclusive of people with disability in all aspects of life. Particularly, Article 19 of the UNCRPD talks about people with disability living independently. So, in order for them to access to shops and parks, the Article 19 talks about how to be inclusive of all. I like what the late Stella Young says. She's a very strong disability advocate for people here in Australia. And she says that my disability exists not because I use a wheelchair, but because the broader environment isn't accessible. Like the wheelchair is our legs. We move around with our wheelchair, but when we have stuff like stairs and all that, it's difficult to get into the shops or get into the banks. So I would say that UNCRPD, that document is a good document to like guide your buildings and all that, structures and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
How
thanks.
to, yeah.
And what does that look like for that legal framework? So if government implements it, what does that do to the design process, the construction process? Does that usually mean that architects and engineers have to think of wheelchair access, ramps, or what does that include with the design and access for construction?
Those legal frameworks would be only useful and influential if it is properly implemented. And in order for it to be properly implemented, a person with disability has to be involved at every stage, from consultation to design to construction, because at the end of the day, they are going to be the one using the building, and they will be the ones to say that whether this is built correctly, or they'll like give advice as you go along. And I have an example where my brother built a house and the carpenter said he knew how to do the ramp. And I said, I have a feeling you won't do it correctly. And he said, no, I know how to do it. And I said, I'll come and test it. I'll just do it with wood. Don't do it with concrete. And I went, and sure enough, it was too steep. So I told him, if you did it with concrete, it would have been a hard work to break it down again. And he said, no, I thought I knew. I said, you have to, like, this is going to be something I'm going to use every day. So I have to be there to test it at the beginning. And those legal frameworks are only useful and influential if you have people. It can be a law. You might think that I've went to school for that, I've studied for that, I know what to do. But when at the end of the day, half the times the lifts, or especially the ramps, are too steep for people with disability. Yeah.
Your passion for advocating for accessibility and equitable inclusion is inspiring. So thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm curious what advice you have for individuals who would want to join this movement for disability inclusion.
My advice would be to search for disabled persons organization in your local area and volunteer there or become a member, just so that you mingle around with them, get to know the story, get to hear the story. And also, like, if you become a member, they'll send you a monthly newsletter where you can read and know what's happening in and around the world and where you can help. Also, to join the disability inclusion movement, people with disability have to be involved in every stage of construction, consultation, designing, and construction. And also, like, once the building is complete, you have to advertise the building to say that this building is accessible can be accessed by people with disability, which is like the 4 types of disability: hearing impairment, vision impairment, and people with mobility issues, as well as intellectual disability. Usually when they say this is an accessible building, like, the first thing that comes to people's mind is only people with wheelchair can access that building. But to be truly inclusive is to include all 4 disabilities. How do you make that building truly inclusive for all 4 of them to access that building? And one way of knowing that is getting to know them, talking to them. They'll be the ones telling you how to make the building inclusive for them.
Yeah, and looking ahead, Ruth, what are your goals and aspirations for the future in terms of furthering disability inclusion and breaking down these barriers?
My goal and aspiration is to do like more of this sort of advocacy, talking to specific sectors about disability inclusion. Like today is the engineering sector, and I'm advocating for how to make buildings inclusive of all 4 types of disability. I would like to do the same for like the health department, the transportation department, and the education department, so that like talking to people with lived experience. I'm not talking against people with technical disability officers or advisors, but it's just that I believe that you have to live the experience to tell the story. And then, like, if I tell you the story of like the carpenter that I had an experience with the carpenter, or other stories about if somebody fell off a ramp, it sticks, it paints a picture in your mind. So when you build, you think of that picture or that story, but someone telling you from the book and telling you how to do it it's not really going to stick in your head. So I'd like to do more of this sort of podcast, just to raise awareness of people, how to be inclusive of people with disability.
Yeah, thanks so much. I know for me, it's, I find it inspiring because obviously you went through, unfortunate things in your life, but you turned it into a positive. And even though it's a disability, you can share your story and you can join organizations and do what you're doing right now to really help a lot of others that are going through the same thing, which may not have happened if you didn't go through the things that you went through. So I definitely appreciate you sharing your story with us and talking about it, because I think a lot of architects, engineers, it's probably not the first thing on their mind because maybe they don't have someone with a disability or talk to anybody. So just want to thank you for doing that and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to doing more of this, just enlightening people on how to be inclusive.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We'd love to hear your feedback, comments, and questions. To leave them, please visit structuralengineeringchannel.com. There you're going to find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources or websites mentioned during the episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, we wish you the best in your structural engineering endeavors.